Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're here with David Parker, who is the New Zealand Minister for Trade, among other positions in his government, and he's visiting Madrid. And the first question I wanted to ask him was about the bilateral relationship. What do you hope to obtain from this visit, and what's the state of the New Zealand-Spain relationship?
I think it's fair to say that the New Zealand-Spain relationship has never been stronger. We have governments that are very similar in outlook. I know that you're in a coalition building phase at the moment.
Hopefully.
But however that ends, I think it's absolutely clear that the values that underlie Spanish society and New Zealand society are very similar. We're both liberal, outward-looking democracies. We value the rule of law, including the rule of international law relating to trade and under other multilateral institutions. And there's not many of us in that club, so we really do have to stick together, and increasingly we are.
One of the things that we in Europe are talking about all the time is the need to strengthen our relationship precisely with like-minded democracies, and New Zealand is obviously a good case in point. What's the state of play in the ongoing negotiations between New Zealand and the EU, and how do you perceive the European Union, both as a potential partner, which it already is, and also as a tough negotiator or a negotiator in this kind of context?
Well, New Zealand's had obviously a long-standing trading relationship with the European Union, with Great Britain and particularly the United Kingdom. Since the 1970s, we've been closed out of what we would call fair market access into Europe. And during that period, we've been forced to grow trade links in other parts of the world, and we've done so very successfully as a country. We were the first OECD country to have a trade agreement with China. And we've got very strong trading relationships with Australia, with the USA, with the CPTPP group of countries. But really the hole in our trade relationships actually remains with Europe, notwithstanding that you're our third largest
partner, trading partner
in trade after China and Australia. The trade imbalance is quite dramatic. We're in balance with virtually every country in the world who we have a trade agreement with, but there's a 2-to-1 trade imbalance in favour of Europe at the moment because of some pretty swingeing rates of tariffs, which of course put up prices for European consumers and also we would say hold back the competitiveness of the European economy. So we're trying to address that through these negotiations.
So at the risk of oversimplifying, is the purpose of this trade agreement basically to allow New Zealand to export its wonderful agricultural products to the EU and open up your market to European industrial products? Is that more or less the trade-off? That's an oversimplification.
I think that is an oversimplification. France, for example, has a trade surplus with New Zealand in dairy. People are surprised to learn that, but we love French cheese. And of course, with these interconnected global value chains, the far larger European dairy industry sells a lot of its products through the New Zealand dairy industry. We're increasingly a technologically advanced country. We have some very interesting areas of technology. We are, for example, the only country to have a satellite industry that is not military based, and we have disrupted that industry worldwide. On the other hand, we import Spanish trains. We use Spanish infrastructure providers for some of our big infrastructure projects. The increasing interconnectedness of countries is also apparent in our trade relationship with Spain and the rest of Europe.
What about Brexit? How is New Zealand getting ready for Brexit, if one can actually get ready
as well as possible? It's an issue that I, as Trade Minister, am careful not to express a New Zealand opinion on. Those are constitutional matters for the United Kingdom and Europe. We have prepared for any eventuality, including having interim agreements in respect of phytosanitary standards, for example, and carryover of the European rules in the interim should the United Kingdom exit the European Union. We're reasonably well prepared.
You're coming to Europe at a time when we're rather obsessed with the growing tension between the US and China.
So are we.
So are you, which was originally a commercial war, a trade war, and is also becoming a technological war. We in Europe are really, to some extent, having to decide how we respond to this, whether we need to take sides, whether our commitment to multilateralism should prevail above all other considerations. How is this tension affecting New Zealand, and how do you see, looking ahead, the impact of this on globalization? Do you think we are witnessing the beginning of a sort of process of deglobalization as a result of growing protectionism and so on?
I'll deal with the last point first. I don't think anyone can avoid globalization. It is a fact. It has been unfolding for centuries. It will continue to unfold. Technology is the driver of that, not trade rules. So the move towards interconnection of economies will not diminish. For countries that try to shield themselves from those forces of globalization, they will suffer, as we see occurs in North Korea as an extreme example. So I think that in the end commercial reason will prevail to a certain extent. Now, in respect of how do you deal with the tensions there are at the moment, I think you have to resort to first principles. Those principles for me include the importance of multilateralism. This hasn't just been a success economically, which it undoubtedly has been for the world and for every country that's involved in it. It's also brought peace. How do you protect multilateralism against the forces of protectionism and selfish behaviour from sometimes larger economies? Well, the countries that have the contrary view have to work harder together. You know, I was at a meeting of a subset of the WTO called the Ottawa Group recently, and the point was made in the room that the combined GDP of those in the room was much larger than the largest economies in the world. Sure. So there is a bit of countervailing power there.
Speaking of WTO, are you optimistic about the future of the WTO? Because some people are basically saying, well, you know, it's increasingly dysfunctional. The US itself is actually trying to undermine it by not renewing certain positions and so on, almost so that this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. At the same time, there are those who argue that China isn't really playing by the rules, although formally it may actually abide by those rules, but it's not really behaving according to the spirit of WTO rules. What's your, as a minister who's dealt with WTO issues, how do you feel about the organisation and its future?
I would say it's in a perilous position, but it is fundamentally important to the rules-based order. We must fight for it. There's actually truth in complaints on both sides. You know, on the one hand, developing countries are right to complain that developed countries talk a good name in free trade, but then act against the interests of some of the products that are common to developing countries, and there's truth in that. There's also truth that some of the rules of the appellate body, which is a complaint of the USA, have not been adhered to, and we agree with the USA on that, and we don't think they should have to trade anything on other areas of WTO rules in order to get the WTO appellate body to adhere to its own rules.
Sure.
We also agree that the rules are out of date and need to be updated, both to take account of changing patterns of commerce in some countries, but also to be updated for the modern world of internet-based trade. So we try and help broker a role through the middle there, because we see all sides of this, and we're not a threat to anyone as a tiny little economy in the bottom of the South Pacific, who has a reputation for ourselves, you know, has a, I think, a deserved reputation for free and fair trade. So yeah, those are the principles we bring to bear.
Let me finally ask you about China. As you know, back in March, the EU published a document which for the first time officially describes China as a strategic rival, which is very tough language by EU standards, given its tendency to be rather wishy-washy about these things. Is there a similar perception in New Zealand about China? Is there a feeling that China is a threat in any way, geopolitically, geoeconomically?
We're careful to pay our respects to all superpowers, and you know, we've at times fallen out with the United States, who we have been an ally with in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Malaysia, We are a member of the Five Eyes Partnership. We still don't see eye to eye on everything with the USA. We're a nuclear-free nation, and that has caused us some decades of turbulence, or did cause us some turbulence of our relationship with the USA. But we stuck to our principles. They were annoyed and a bit frustrated with us, but they didn't unduly penalise us, and they were overall fair to us. We bring that same underlying reputation for sticking to our principles in our relationship with China. We have a positive relationship with China. Our trade is broadly in balance. In fact, it's a little bit in surplus in favour of New Zealand because of tourism, services, not because of goods. And we have quiet and persuasive conversations with China where they deliver messages to us and we deliver messages to them, and we do so out of the public gaze mainly, and we find overall that our relationship with China is strong. I was at the Belt and Road conference earlier in the year. It was interesting that, so was just about every other country in the world. And it was good to hear Xi Jinping talk about the need to fight against corruption in Belt and Road projects, acknowledge some of the problems with soft loans left behind in leaving behind debt owed by countries that can't afford it, broadening the concept of Belt and Road to go beyond physical infrastructure to cooperation around things like business practices, good business practice. And our own experience with intellectual property is that the Chinese system is improving year by year in the protection of intellectual property. So we perhaps sit somewhere in the middle. We think that some of the complaints made are valid, but that many are exaggerated.
Well, that really does show that New Zealand has always punched well above its weight in these areas. So congratulations, and I hope you have a very enjoyable visit here in Madrid.
It's impossible not to have an enjoyable visit to Madrid.
Welcome to Madrid. Thank you.